Slow Burn Media and Bill Huffman present this week's episode of My Passion Case with true crime author and podcaster James Renner.
It is being billed as a massive announcement in the local law enforcement community. Tomorrow, U.S. Marshals plan to release the true identity of Joseph Newton Chandler III. A man who killed himself in Eastlake in 2002 went by that name, but it was not his name. We were told he played some role in a case being called one of Ohio's biggest and most complex. Tomorrow at 1 o'clock, WKYC.com will carry the announcement live.
A big thank you to James Renner for coming into the studio and speaking some truth about Joseph Newton Chandler. And thank you guys for tuning into this week's episode of My Passion Case. I would also like to thank all the podcasters and guests who have taken time out of their busy schedules to help build the show into what it has become. As a reminder, I do drop new episodes of My Passion Case every Monday and Who Killed every Friday, and that is wherever you get your favorite shows. And for the second year in a row, I will be representing Who Killed Amy Mahalovic, and My Passion Case on Podcast Row at CrimeCon 2020 in Orlando, May 1st through the 3rd. It's definitely a bucket list item for any true crime fan. And if you guys want to save money on your ticket, I actually have a promo code for you, and that is Amy2020. And if you guys enjoyed this podcast, you can help support independent journalism as well as the show by clicking on the donate button on the left-hand side of slowburnmedia.com. That is slow minus the W. As well as you can contribute to the show via the Venmo app with my username at Bill-Huffman-3. Again, I will provide a note in the show notes. Every contribution does help keep these podcasts running. If you, again, enjoy the show, leaving a 5-star review will also help keep these cases in the spotlight. I, again, will be putting new information on Twitter, and you can follow me at BillHuffman3. And again, thank you guys so much for listening this week, and until next time, as always, be safe. This week I am lucky enough to be joined on My Passion Case with true crime author James Renner. And welcome to My Passion Case, James.
Hey, it's your pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Bill. This is cool. I like the idea for the new podcast. It's I think every reporter has their case that they're obsessed with, they're passionate about. Maybe a couple.
Yeah, I definitely think that the idea behind the series was basically to get into the minds of the people that do the investigations or do the podcasts or do the documentaries or anything along those lines. Because, like you said, everybody does have a case that they're passionate about. Mm-hmm. So this is where I ask you, what is the case that you are the most passionate about at this present moment? Because I know that you cover a lot.
I think the case that I still think about a lot, because of the weirdness of it, is the unsolved, well, now it's solved, suicide of one Joseph Newton Chandler III.
So Joseph Newton Chandler, now give me a little bit of background on him and where he was actually from. I mean, like where he died. Let's start there.
So here's the setup. It takes place in Eastlake, suburb on the east side of Cleveland, workaday suburb. In 2002, this was the summer, I think his body was discovered July 30th. He was this... so this old man was known as Joseph Newton Chandler, and he lived in this efficiency apartment over there in Eastlake. And when you say efficiency, I'm talking like there were like two rooms. One big room that was like living room / kitchen, and then the bedroom. And he had very little in the way of furniture and things in the apartment. He had in his bedroom, you walk in, you look in the closet, and there's like one change of clothes. Like, this is a guy that was kind of known around that complex as like a hermit. He was a shut-in. He would only come out of that apartment to like go to the grocery store and basic necessities. And some of them knew that before he retired, he had worked as, I believe, an electrical engineer for a company called Lubrizol. And he was real good at making like little gadgets. He had made this remote for a fire station or something where when their alarm went off, it would trigger the garage. And if you talk to his coworkers at Lubrizol, he's kind of a weird dude. He rigged up this kind of like Walkman where he would sit and listen to static all day. Like he had the static that he would listen to on these headphones. Anyways, long story short, so the setup is that one day in the summer of 2002, this old man who seemingly had no friends and didn't really have any enemies committed suicide. And he did so by standing in front of his mirror in his little bathroom, and he put a gun to his head. But before he did this, he closed his blinds, locked his door, and turned off the air conditioning. So what that did was speed up the decomposition process.
Yeah, I was going to ask if this was winter or spring.
It was summer. Late July 2002. It was very hot. And I don't know what prompted them really to search. I think it was the smell. And when police got in there, his body was so badly decomposed, they were not able to get fingerprints off the body. And when they looked for fingerprints in the apartment, they found that the entire apartment had been scrubbed down. There were no fingerprints in the apartment.
Like wiped down, like what we see in the movies, like that type of thing?
It appears that way, yeah. They did find, I believe, a partial print behind, like on the porcelain behind the toilet, as if he had lifted, and maybe that was a place he forgot to wipe down. But it wasn't enough to identify him, so, at this point they know him as Joseph Newton Chandler. The police look into his bank accounts and personal finances and find out that he has like $82,000 sitting in a bank, and here he is living as meager an existence as you can get. Why did he commit suicide? Well, they found he had an appointment at the hospital not long before the suicide where he was diagnosed with cancer. But it was kind of treatable cancer, but he opted not to be treated, I guess. And finally, the police, they find a guy that used to work with him at Lubrizol, who is the closest thing you could call a friend to this guy, I guess. And they make him executor of his estate. And what this guy does is hire a private investigator. The court, actually the court, this estate court, and this guy hire a private investigator named Mike Lewis. Now, Mike Lewis is a friend of mine. We go way back. He's a neat guy. And in fact, he's on the board of directors for the Porchlight Project, which is this nonprofit I've started up where we raise money for new DNA tests for cold cases here in North Ohio. Anyways, Mike Lewis caught the case, and he went and found Joseph Newton Chandler's birth certificate and then used that to find the names of Joseph Newton Chandler's parents, and then backtrack that to siblings. Long story, fairly shorter, is they call up Joseph Newton Chandler's sister, and they're like, "Hey, we got some bad news. Your brother committed suicide here in Eastlake," and she's like, "That's impossible because my brother died in 1945." And that's when this case really got interesting, because what they discovered was this old man who had committed suicide in Eastlake in 2002 had been living under a fake name in and around Cleveland for 30 years. So who was this guy, right?
So they didn't actually have any idea who he was until they tried to contact the next of kin and then realized that it was a false identity.
Right. Right. Okay. Everybody thought he was Joseph Newton Chandler until they found his sister, and she's like, "Nope. My brother died in this." It was actually a really tragic story where the family, it was right before Christmas, and they were traveling. They had presents in the car, and a truck coming towards them went left of center in the middle of the night, and head-on collision. The kid died in the crash. So whoever this guy was in Eastlake that was calling him Joseph Newton Chandler somehow knew about this and used that kid's name to apply for a Social Security card and create this fake identity for himself in, I think in the late 70s, like around 1978.
Is this one of those things where the lack of, I guess, technology and basically record keeping allowed people to basically, because I've heard before where people have gone to graveyards and they find a person that was killed at a certain year, and then they steal that person's identity.
Yeah, you try to look for, people that were born, the same year you were born, or right around there, so they're the same approximate age, and specifically looking for children who died, because what you're hoping to find is somebody that never applied for their Social Security number and didn't really have much ID. So then that was the old way of claiming somebody else's identity, and in a clean way, right? So that nobody suspected anything. Whether this guy did it himself or whether he hired, people in the know, mafia.
Vacuum cleaner guy from Breaking Bad.
Right. I hear you clean houses. Or paint houses. Paint house. I hear you paint houses. However he did it, I think he originally obtained that identification they were able to track it down to where the Social Security card was issued, to a small town in South Dakota in like the late 70s. So, but that's kind of where the trail went cold for many years. And I've gotten to know this guy, Pete Elliott, who's the head of the U.S. Marshals Service here in Cleveland. Pete Elliott's this really neat guy, kind of old school. He reminds me of those, have gun will travel, old school, like deputy, like lawman, gunslinger. His dad, also Pete Elliott Sr., was U.S. Marshal here in Cleveland before him, so it's this legacy thing. But every once in a while, Pete Elliott will reach out to me, and he's like, hey, we're looking for this fugitive. Can you get a little information up on Reddit? Because they know I'm proficient with these Reddit sub-communities where they discuss unsolved murders. And so it's fun, to help out the marshals every once in a while and get some information out there and kick up some new leads.
Yeah, it's always good to be involved, especially if you feel like you're producing something positive.
So Pete came to me a few years ago and said, hey, this Joseph Newton Chandler case that I was aware of, and I think he knew that I liked. He's like, I got some new information. Why don't you come up to the office? So I went up there, and he had laid out on the desk a whole bunch of stuff that they had gotten from Chandler's apartment, and I took a bunch of pictures of it. And some of them were these weird little electronic gadgets that he had made. Other stuff was, I remember there was this sticker from a Peanuts cartoon that was issued in the late 70s, and they thought that this must have some sort of sentimental value to him. And what was that all about? So, but while I was there, he also told me some interesting stories that they had found on Chandler. One of them was in 1989. This would be, I think, late fall or early fall of 1989. Chandler went to a hospital on the east side of Cleveland, one of the suburbs out there, and they were able to find this old hospital record. And the reason he went to this hospital was because he had suffered severe lacerations on his penis, and like it was all apparently cut up. And he went to the emergency room, and they're like, "What the hell happened to you?" What he told the nurse at the time was that he was having sex with a vacuum cleaner, and things got out of hand. But I
was just joking about the vacuum cleaner earlier. That was a joke. I didn't realize he actually had a connection to a vacuum. So that is a complete coincidence.
But, who knows if that's the truth. Whatever, something happened where, like, his penis got all cut up. And so that led the U.S. Marshals to believe, well, maybe what we're dealing with here is some sort of sexual deviant who is running from some crime, and he had this compulsion to do something again in the fall of 89. So that kind of put a new light on it. And Pete Elliott was very convinced that, and the reason the marshals were involved was this guy went to such great lengths to hide his true identity that they figured the only thing he could be running from is a crime of some great magnitude. So what is he running from?
Well, I mean, there's no statute of limitations on murder, so It has to be something along those lines.
It almost has to be murder, because even by then, the statute of limitations on rape would have run out. Mm-hmm. So, the thought is this got to be murder. So things went cold again for a little while until Pete Elliott heard about this new forensic genetic genealogy technique. And right away, he's like, oh, I wonder if, this could help with the Chandler case. So he came in contact with Colleen Fitzpatrick and Margaret Press of the DNA Doe Project, and they had had some success identifying a woman named Lori Erica Ruff, which is a very kind of similar case. A woman in the Pacific Northwest committed suicide, and then her husband discovered she had been living under a fake name for like 20 years. And that was an interesting case because what Colleen and her genealogists were able to do was they had the daughter's DNA. So this woman who was living under a fake name had a daughter with her husband, but they didn't have the woman's DNA who killed herself. So what they were able to do was take the daughter's DNA and the father's DNA, and then they filtered out all the markers from the father's DNA from the daughter's, and what they were left were markers that had to come from this mystery woman. And in that way, they were able to identify her real name. So Chandler's similar in some ways, right? So, but we don't have fingerprints. We don't have, well, what do we have in the case? Actually, we got lucky. And when this guy was diagnosed with cancer, when he went to the hospital that time, they took a tissue sample and they kept it. So they had excellent DNA to work with. And they gave it to the genetic genealogist and Colleen and Margaret's crew, and they used what's called the YSTR, which is some of the genetic information from your Y chromosome, which passes from father to their children, or their sons, right? Because only males have the Y DNA because of the Y chromosome. So they took the information from that and went on the site called GEDmatch. Now, what else passes from father to son like YSTRs? Last names, right? Mm-hmm. Surnames. So if you have a really good YSTR data, you plug it into GEDmatch. Sometimes you're lucky enough to figure out what this person's last name was. By doing that, they were able to determine that this guy's last name was probably something like Nicholson or Nichols, and they released that information. They said, hey, does this make sense to anybody? And further testing and tips led them to the identity of this man. Now, I want to set this up because this is kind of a weird little coincidence in my life. So this was right when the genetic genealogy news was breaking. This was right after they got the Golden State Killer, right? Mm-hmm. And so it was a big deal, and nobody had written a long-form article on this yet. So I saw this as an opportunity. I'm like, this is amazing. It's going to change everything. It's the best new tool we have since we discovered what we can do with fingerprints, right?
I remember you telling me about this article that you were working on.
Yeah. So I called up Colleen Fitzpatrick, mm-hmm. and I said, I'm like, I'm going to fly out to Southern California just to sit down with you because I'm so fascinated by what you do. So we set up a time to meet, and I booked my flight, and it's the day before the flight. And, I go non-refundable because I'm crazy like that. And she calls me up. She's like, I can't meet with you tomorrow. And I'm like, why can't you? I can't change my plans now. She's like, well,
guess I'm going to California.
Yeah. She's like, well, I can't tell you why, but I can't meet with you. And I'm like, well, that really sucks. So there's nothing I can do to change that. So I decided to go out there for other meetings and keep the flight. A couple hours later, Pete Elliott calls me. And he's like, hey, what are you doing tomorrow? And I'm like, actually, I'm flying out to Southern California. I was supposed to meet Colleen Fitzpatrick, and now she can't meet with me. I don't know what's going on. He's like, well, it might be best to not go on that trip and stay here in Cleveland. And I'm like, why? What's going on? And I thought that he might have a break in the Amy Mihalovic case. I thought that might be what he was talking about. I didn't put it all together. So I'm on this flight, and I land in L.A.
So you ended up going?
I ended up going. There was other business I had to do out there.
Sure.
So I land, and when I land, I turn on my phone off airline mode, and all of a sudden, all these texts come in, and it's all the reporters I know from Cleveland saying, "Hey, you got to get to this press conference," and the reason Colleen couldn't meet with me is because she had flown to Cleveland, where I live, to do this press conference with Pete Elliott because they had solved the Joseph Newton Chandler case.
Why the hell do you always end up in these situations? I mean, seriously. You are just prone to, like, maybe you should pull a Costanza and just kind of do the opposite of what James Renner would do. I'm gonna get on that plane, but maybe you don't get on that plane and you end up solving the case.
Right. I think something needs to change. It's the worst luck. So here's how they did it. They weren't far off with that. They were thinking Nicholson or variations of that. Turns out this guy's real name was Robert Ivan Nichols, and they were able to. I think once Colleen gave them that name, there were a couple ways that they figured out that it was probably Robert Ivan Nichols. And Robert Ivan Nichols, by the way, I think was from Michigan, so he wasn't far from home here in Ohio. He grew up with 3 brothers, I think working class family. He had gotten married and had a couple kids of his own. So Colleen and her team were looking over the information that was coming in. And one of the things they looked at was, so this guy that was calling himself Joseph Newton Chandler, when he moved into the efficiency in Eastlake, he filled out, a resident form. And one of the questions was, list your previous address. And he wrote this address, and, it's this, Columbus, Ohio. Right away, when Pete Elliott got involved, they tracked that address down and found out that that address in Columbus doesn't exist. It's made up. But liars, I think Elliott said something to the effect of they always lie close to home, or, there's always some truth in the lie, right? Mm-hmm. Well, when Colleen's team of genealogists went through all that information, one of them found this family, Nichols, and there was an address in Michigan. Now, the street number and the street name were the same for that address, either in Michigan or New York. Now, I can't remember which. And it matched the address in Columbus. So the address was right. He had just changed the city. So they're like, wow, this is probably our guy. And Pete Elliott was so sure he flew down to meet with Robert Ivan Nichols' brother, who lived in southern Ohio. And as soon as he answered the door, he knew he had the right guy, because this guy looked so much like the guy that was up here calling himself Joseph Chandler. So they have this announcement. They say, hey, we figured out part of the mystery, right? Because now we know who this guy was. He was Robert Ivan Nichols, but we don't know what he was running from still. And so we learn a little bit about Robert Nichols and but not much about why he wanted to disappear. He was a veteran of World War II. He served on a big ship, and it got hit by the Japanese.
Okay.
I think he was wounded during that incident, and when he returned home, he burned his clothing. I think it was World War II, unless it was Korea. Let me look that up real quick.
I mean, as far as Chandler goes, I think the biggest thing that I find interesting is that you can be in this world still anonymous.
Right. Like, how hard is that to pull off now?
I think he fell right into the perfect, little seam where it was that time and that place where he could pull it off. But, think about how many things that this has run speculation on as far as what he may have been running from. And you had mentioned that service member.
Yeah. He was, okay, so here it is. He was, that address was actually New Albany, Indiana. And Robert Nichols had served on the USS Aaron Ward, and yes, it was World War II, bombed by the Japanese in 1945 off Okinawa. He actually was awarded the Purple Heart, but when he came home, he burned his uniforms. And now here's where it gets interesting. In 1964, Nichols just disappears. He leaves his wife and kids, files for divorce, moves to Dearborn, Michigan. He tells his parents he's got a job, and then tells them he's moving to Richmond, California. Long story short, he shows up in Napa, California around 1965.
Interesting timing.
Right? And his family never hears from him again. Now, any true crime fan will know Napa, California, 1965, that area, that's the Zodiac. And we know that, Robert Nichols is very good with gadgets and, these little games and just eccentric. So I kind of like the theory that I think he's a good suspect for the Zodiac.
I mean, he would have been able to produce the ciphers and and the coded technology, that type of that aspect of what the Zodiac was, communicating with the police, or not the police, but with the newspapers.
Right, and then those crimes stop when around the time he moves to Ohio.
Okay, so he's
in the area when the Zodiac killings are taking place, and if ever there's a reason to run away and become somebody new, it's because the police are hot on your tail for the Zodiac case. So that's one theory. I don't know how. I'm not saying he's the Zodiac. I think it's just a really cool explanation for it, and the timing fits and the location fits. So I think it's a neat theory. But theories about what this guy was up to, go all over the place. And, some people just think, what we're dealing with here is a guy that went through the hell of war, got injured, and just became disillusioned with society and life and responsibilities of a father and husband, and took off.
Don Draper style.
Right. But then you've got the stuff like, he shows up at a hospital because his penis is all cut up.
Why is his penis all cut up?
Right. And there are these stories that come out about Robert Nichols before he became Joseph Newton Chandler. I heard the story about there was a birthday party at his house. I don't know if it was for one of his kids or what. And he was getting impatient because he wanted to cut the cake and serve it. And, he strikes me as a guy with maybe some OCD issues. And, he just walks over to the cake and puts his hand in it and takes out a big scoop and starts eating the cake in front of everybody.
Not necessarily the most socially inept person.
Or mentally, competent or whatever. He was just a weird guy. And when he was working at Lubrizol here in Cleveland, this, that guy that became executor of his estate, a guy named Mike, said that every once in a while he'd get real paranoid and he would say, he's like, they're getting close to me. They're getting close. And then he would disappear for a week or two.
Now, he never emphasized who.
Or what, right, yeah. And then he would show up again like nothing happened. One time he wanted to buy some LL Bean clothing.
Did anybody ask him about that, when he would reappear?
You would think. I'm sure, but I think he came up with, it's just something I had to deal with. There's the story about how he wanted some LL Bean clothing and decided to, on a whim, drive up to Maine to the headquarters, and he got there. So he drives up to the headquarters, and he gets there, and there's not an open space in the parking lot. So he, instead of waiting, just turns around and drives all the way from Maine back to Ohio. And he's like, well, they didn't have a space for me. So it's a weird dude, weird crime, and we still don't know exactly why he became Joseph Newton Chandler.
And in all reality, he's not actually committed a crime that we know of.
Right, that we know of, which is, I think, why it's kind of fallen away, because I think a lot of people, they're like, oh, the mystery's solved, we know who he was. Well, that's only half of it. Well, I think he was running from something. The marshals think he was running from something. We just don't know what that is yet.
I mean, it doesn't take a true crime aficionado to look at this case and go, well, he has to have been running from something.
Right.
Because nobody goes to that extent to change their identity.
Right.
Take on a whole new persona.
If he just wanted to get away from his wife and kids, he could do that.
It was the 70s.
Right.
He could have just left.
I'm going out for a pack of cigarettes. I'll be right back.
Exactly. I mean, this isn't like, people are going to track you down and make you pay child support in the 1970s. I mean, as much as they may have, it wasn't as simple as it is today where you can track somebody down. The technology just wasn't there.
I think there's an unsolved murder, at least one out there that this guy's responsible for. So maybe a true crime sleuth can go back through where he was at those times to figure out, maybe there's a case out there that matches up with where he was at the time, other than the Zodiac, I was so fascinated by this case. I remember hearing about it when I was a reporter with Scene, and we didn't know who he was at the time. And I thought, wow, what a cool mystery. Who was this guy? And I thought, well, maybe I could write a book, a novel about this. And but what would be the weirdest explanation for who that guy is? And I thought, well, what wouldn't it be interesting to write a book? And the answer is that guy is me, but he had come back from the future. Like it was me as an old man who had come back, and I was investigating my own suicide / murder or whatever. And so that nugget, that seed of the story became my first novel, The Man from Primrose Lane, and which is about a reporter from an alternative weekly from Cleveland who investigates this murder that it turns out to be himself.
Wow. He seems like somebody from a different time.
Oh yeah. I'm not saying
we're not saying that. That's not what we're saying.
It was aliens.
Well, that's exactly what we're saying. I watched the Time Life videos from the 1980s. I remember.
Those are scary.
I couldn't sleep at night half that. But you would see this on this seems like something from Unsolved Mysteries.
Oh yeah, this was
this was primed for an episode of
for sure.
Unsolved Mysteries.
I think we're still gonna. It's still a good mystery because we don't have that other piece, like what he was running from. So when Unsolved Mysteries comes back, I hear they're rebooting. This would be an excellent case for that.
Yeah, I definitely think that all these cases where you have people that are masking their identity.
Oh, I love
and
those.
that had that ability to do so because of the time.
Mm-hmm. I think I love cases like that. I think it's partly because we all have that fantasy of just, at some point in your adult life, you're like, oh man, this is just a slog. I've got all these responsibilities. I've got these bills. Maybe I'll just start driving west and see how far I can get. And I think some people still do it.
Yeah, I definitely think that was a thing for sure. Back in the day, my gosh, like you said, go out for a pack of cigarettes and they don't come back. That's just a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason.
Right. There are a bunch more stories like this. I happen to be researching it right now for my podcast, which I'm going to plug, The Philosophy of Crime. I'm doing this episode on if it's possible to still leave your life and disappear for good. And another case like this that's kind of interesting is Olivia. Olivia Newton-John.
Absolutely.
From Sandy from Greece.
Who doesn't?
She had a boyfriend who disappeared without a trace after a fishing expedition. I think back in like 15 years ago now or something like that. Fairly recent, but Olivia Newton-John's boyfriend disappears, and Dateline did an episode where these private investigators supposedly tracked him down, and he's just chilling in a bar in Mexico with his new girlfriend, and he did it to avoid credit card debt, and his wife had sued him for child support. So
I was thinking Natalie Wood type thing, but
yeah, and at first, it was ruled drowning. He had the Coast Guard investigated it, and they're like, oh, this guy fell off the boat during the fishing trip, and he's drowned. We'll never find the body. But people were suspicious because it was a small boat, and nobody heard him fall over, and he had this debt, and so they started looking into it, and they're like, no, this guy's alive. He's been down here in Mexico, and so that's a strange one. But and we only know about it because it's so high profile.
Well, I think there's another one too where the guy faked a plane crash or something in Florida, and
oh yeah, I forgot about that.
And
one.
that he was I think on the run from embezzling money from a bank or some business in Indiana,
right.
And I think he was eventually brought to justice, but.
There are rumors that Ken Lay, remember the Enron scandal?
I have actually listened to The Conspiracy of Fools as well as The Smartest Men in the Room and seen the documentary all within the last, I've seen The Smartest Men in the Room a bunch of times, but the book, The Smartest Men in the Room, is fabulous. So is Conspiracy of Fools. And yeah, you do really wonder what happened. He
was about to go to prison for
ever
the rest of his life, right? And then he dies of a heart attack about a week before the sentencing. And this funny business about the autopsy. They cremated his body and all this stuff. And then there were these sightings in these Caribbean islands that Ken Lay was just chilling on the beach down there. And I totally, if anybody could pull it off, it's a rich dude like that. I don't know, maybe it's just a wishful thinking or conspiracy, but yeah, are people still doing this? Can they do this,
I think it kind of goes back to what you were saying before about the idea of being able to leave your life behind and troubles behind. And
Yep.
If we're going to talk about the Enron, Ken Lay, and Skilling and all those guys, yeah, you're right. If anybody had the ability, it would have been one of those guys. But
maybe there's this island in the Caribbean that if you know the right people, you can get down there and I'd love to go to this island and
I know the landlord, his name was Jeffrey Epstein.
Right. Well, I was getting there. Yeah, you walk on this island and there's Elvis Presley hanging out, singing some tunes, and Jim Morrison and Tupac and all these people we want to still be alive. And change their name. Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, I think they made a show in the 70s called Fantasy Island.
The plane.
Exactly. But yeah, absolutely. The Chandler case is so fascinating. And living in Cleveland, obviously, we're close to the situation. But I think even nationally, it was an interesting case because of the fact that we don't know what it was that he was running from and what he could actually be involved with. It could be anything from A to Z, and I'm not using Z as the Zodiac just for fun, but...
just talking about this, I guess it definitely is my passion case because, it's been a while since I've talked through this case, and every time I do, I get excited, and I'm like, well, maybe there's a book here. Maybe there's since it's halfway done anyways, maybe there's a book where we try to figure out, what he was running from and get some answers there. But I don't know. It's definitely one of my favorite cases.
If you had to take a wild stab at it, no pun intended, what do you think he's running from?
It's probably something sexually related. So either a violent sexual assault, rape, or rape and murder. Because of his whatever he was up to that sent him to the hospital. That might have been another attack that he was able to get away from.
Yeah, we've all heard of incidences where women fight back with aggression if they're being forced upon.
Maybe somebody bit him.
Exactly where I was going with that.
Sure.
So, it's a possibility. And I think, not to dwell on 1989, but I'm about to do an episode on who killed about the New Bedford highway killer. And that was 88 to 89, or it all occurred in 88. But man, what a shitty year.
Right. Yeah. There are people that wonder if he was involved with Amy Mahalovic. I personally don't think so. But just given the timing that he ended up in the hospital, it was the same year as Amy was abducted and not far away. It's a stretch, but people have wondered about that too, although I don't think so.
Yeah, and I would definitely assume that you would be the first person to reach out to in regards to that situation if
I've
it
heard
was
that a couple times.
If it was connected to that case at all. I just don't see it being a reason why. Yeah, basically the way I feel about the case is I think we're at a point where we don't know anymore.
Right.
And we're kind of at a speculation point. And I hope maybe with all the technology and DNA and the improvements in DNA technology that they'll maybe be able to tie him to something.
Yeah, I think, it's going to be awareness of these news stories and podcasts about him. I think there's some family of a victim out there somewhere that has been waiting for closure, and they're going to hear that this guy was in Napa or New Albany or Ohio, and it'll click. They're like, oh, wait a second. Maybe he's responsible for what happened to my sister or, my aunt or something like that. And those people, when they come forward to the U.S. Marshals or the police, will be the person who solves it, I think.
Well, yeah, I definitely think it's going to have to be solved through DNA or just somebody coming forward that says that's my so-and-so or
Right.
He's the person that assaulted me. But James, I know that you've got many, many things on your plate, as you always do, being the fabulous true crime author and true crime
Every day
podcast.
I'm hustling.
Hey, you're the host of Philosophy of Crime. You are a man of many, many books. So
I'm trying to
give
get
some
around.
plugs.
I'm still doing this tour called Confessions of a True Crime Addict. I'm hoping to get out to New England later in 2020. Maine, Boston, Vermont, New Hampshire. If you live in those areas, go to jamesrenner.com to find out when and where. I've got some books out there if you like mysteries. So check them out.
Yeah, I think you can find all those on Amazon as well. So definitely check out all of James' stuff. He's definitely a staple here in the city of Cleveland and has made quite a presence for himself in the national scene as far as true crime goes. So I am very appreciative to have you on My Passion Case this
Anytime.
week.
Yes.
And
Good luck with it.
I know that we have had you on my other podcast, Who Killed Amy Mahalovic, a million times. So I appreciate all your time and your just willingness to come to the studio, talk, and discuss the cases that you find the most interesting. So I know you've got things to do, so I appreciate it, James.
Yeah, anytime. Give me a call.
And I will talk to you soon.
All right. See ya.
Take care. A big thank you to James Renner for coming into the studio and speaking some truth about Joseph Newton Chandler. And thank you guys for tuning into this week's episode of My Passion Case. I would also like to thank all the podcasters and guests who have taken time out of their busy schedules to help build the show into what it has become. As a reminder, I do drop new episodes of My Passion Case every Monday and Who Killed every Friday. And that is wherever you get your favorite shows. And for the second year in a row, I will be representing Who Killed Amy Mahalovic, and My Passion Case on Podcast Row at CrimeCon 2020 in Orlando, May 1st through the 3rd. It's definitely a bucket list item for any true crime fan. And if you guys want to save money on your ticket, I actually have a promo code for you, and that is Amy2020. And if you guys enjoyed this podcast, you can help support independent journalism as well as the show by clicking on the donate button on the left-hand side of slowburnmedia.com. That is slow minus the W. As well as you can contribute to the show via the Venmo app with my username at Bill-Huffman-3. Again, I will provide a note in the show notes. Every contribution does help keep these podcasts running. If you, again, enjoy the show, leaving a 5-star review will also help keep these cases in the spotlight. I, again, will be putting new information on Twitter, and you can follow me at BillHuffman3. And, again, thank you guys so much for listening this week, and until next time, as always, be safe.
The DNA profile from Chandler was sent to the lab in Cuyahoga County. Dr. Fitzpatrick and Press was sent to them for comparison in Y DNA genetic databases. Dr. Fitzpatrick and Press were able to determine that Chandler's real last name was Nicholas or a variation of Nicholas. This was the first investigation in Marshal Service history that we utilized forensic genealogy. In early 2018, led by Identifiers International, led by Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick and Dr. Margaret Press, along with a team of investigators, were able to locate a Robert Ivan Nichols from New Albany, Indiana, if you can get board number 4, who had similarities to Chandler. We then began an investigation to find relatives and find other information on Nichols. In March of 2018, the Marshal Service located a son of Nichols who resided in Ohio. We obtained DNA from him, which we then provided to the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office, who originally had the DNA of Chandler. That DNA sample from the Nichols son positively matched with the DNA of the person calling himself Joseph Newton Chandler III. The son stated to us that his last contact with his father was in 1965 when he received a letter from his father, postmarked from Napa, California. We learned that Nichols was in the United States Navy World War II, originally stationed in San Francisco, and served on the USS Aaron Ward, which was bombed by the Japanese on May 3rd of 1945. Nichols was injured and later received the Purple Heart. Nichols came back from the war and burned his uniforms, according to family members. Can you get board number 5, please? Handwritten letters, postmarks, and documentation that we received shows that Nichols resided in Dearborn, Michigan in 1964, then settled in San Francisco and Richmond, California areas in 1965, and possibly the Los Angeles area. He was reported missing in 1965 by his parents and his family, and numerous attempts by California authorities and Indiana authorities and authorities all over the U.S. failed to locate him and were unsuccessful. If you can get the next board, please. Sorry about all the boards. This thing's just really hard to explain at some point. So, the family never heard from Nichols again after 1965. Now, the first part of this mystery of who Joseph Newton Chandler is has now been solved. But now we need the public's help to determine the why. There is a reason he went missing in 1965 and assumed the name of a deceased 8-year-old boy in 1978 and went hiding for so many years. There is a reason he never again contacted his family, left $82,000 in a bank account without leaving it to his own son, who resided in our state. Robert Ivan Nichols never wanted to be found throughout his lifetime, even into his death.